Please do not intend to try this. The content of this video is solely based on past human experiences and may vary according to a person's physical or mental state at a specific moment. All the information shared are merely for educational and entertainment purposes only.
So, every time a person goes on a plane, they literally entrust their lives to the pilots and the crew who are in charge of their flight. As one has little to no control on what may happen during a flight, given their situation, the responsibility of their safety goes to the flight company and its employees, making sure all possible underlying problems are rectified before the takeoff. Although to date, it is recorded that the chances of a person actually dying in a plane crash is 1 to 11 million, many still fail to shake off that tingling sense of uncertainty while boarding a plane. Now in the past decade, there had been a number of flight incidents that shook the world. One of it is the MH370 Malaysian flight, which departed from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, headed towards Beijing. The flight somehow mysteriously vanished in the midst of its journey, and was last tracked by military radars to have deviated from its planned path. 227 passengers and 12 crew members were never found since, being presumed dead. This has been recorded as the deadliest incident involving a Boeing 777. Massive search operations were even carried out but to no avail. And until today, nobody is able to really tell as to where and what happened to the plane, rendering it as one of aviation's most agonizing mystery. So what does it feel like to go through a possible plane crash? And can one even survive the fall? According to statistics, as of today, 80% of all plane crashes are due to human error, whereas only 20% are of bad weather, hijacks, etc. Now having said that, there are basically two kinds of scenario that may take place. One of it is when the problem is made known to the pilot, where pilots would assess and make appropriate calls, notifying the passengers and getting them ready for what's known as a controlled crash. The other scenario, on the other hand, would be of an unpredictable incident that strips the pilot off of their ability to be in control, not allowing for any advance notice or instructions. This includes hijacks, man-made explosions, pilots passing out, etc. The latter would usually lead to a more fatal crash, as the situation is considered to be more out of hand, causing all outcomes to be greatly dependent on the fate of the passengers. Here are some of the known things a person may experience in a flight incident. Firstly, during crazy maneuvers, one may experience a sense of weightlessness, being thrown up into the air with objects and luggages flying around. And if unprotected, one may very easily get injured upon colliding with these objects. Depending on the motion, huge amount of G-force will also be exerted on one's body. And as the plane reaches terminal velocities, the sheer force inflicted is usually no longer compensated by the normal human body. This then causes a person to go into a state of confusion, slowly losing their vision and finally slipping into unconsciousness. However, in a more controlled situation, pilots will always tell their passengers to brace themselves for any sharp maneuvers or impact, lowering the possibility for any wild spirals or dives. And at this point, a person's fight or flight response would usually trigger, causing adrenaline and norepinephrine to be released from one's adrenal glands. One would start to experience a rise in heart rate, as neurons in their brain starts firing, allowing for quicker reactions. This also allows for one's body to feel less pain and muscle stress during the situation. Now, if there was an explosion that were to tear a hole in the plane, it would cause the cabin's pressure bubble to burst. This is due to the massive difference in pressure from the outside. As the air pressure on the outside at that altitude is lower than of the insides of the plane, air pressure rushes out rapidly when there's an opening. This pressure is basically strong enough to tear a person's body apart, and it is known as explosive decompression. But that being said, this usually requires for a very large hole to appear almost instantly in order for the pressure difference to cause severe damages. Although so, passengers close to the hole may experience a strong suction that may pull them out of the plane. If this happens, one would literally be free falling to their death at the speed of about 200 kilometers per hour. And as the cabin experiences pressure loss, there would also be a lack of oxygen. One would need to quickly grab onto the yellow masks on top of them. These yellow masks are installed to be deployed automatically upon certain conditions. And if they are not deployed, pilots or the crew may manually deploy them. A person would only have a small time window of about 10 seconds to put them on before they fall unconscious. Also, at this stage, if a pilot is in control, the pilot may opt to start dumping some or most of the fuel from the plane. This is often done to reduce the excess weight before trying to land a plane. Moreover, This also minimizes the possibility for any massive explosions or flames in a crash landing. If landing at an airport is no longer a valid option, pilots are trained to often try to go as far as possible away from inhabited cities to perform a crash landing. This is solely to avoid causing more deaths. And if the plane is close to an ocean, a pilot would almost always choose to crash land in an ocean rather than on land. If a plane crashes on land, an explosion may be inevitable. Depending on the size and weight of the plane, upon impact, it may toss a person right into the ground, as seen in some crash sites, where bodies are half buried in the ground. But that being said, the explosion and flames may very well blow apart a person's body before it even happens, cremating their remains. Looking at the crash of China Eastern Airlines MU-5735. The plane literally took a vertical dive right down onto the mountain areas in Tang County, Wuzhou. Upon locating the crash site, little to no body remains were found. According to experts, the flames from the explosion were presumed to have been so great that it had even burnt down the bones of the victims, killing all 132 passengers on board. Without actual remains, families of these victims were then told to each grab handfuls of mud and dirt, placing them in containers to be brought back as their remains. But despite that, there are still a handful of people in the past who were known to have been lucky enough to survive a plane crash, given the intensity of the impact. Although so, the person would usually end up badly injured from the crash at this point, having lost maybe a limb or two. And if one manages to regain their consciousness, it is highly advisable that they move as fast as they can, to at least 150 meters away from the burning plane, and into the wind, as it protects one from being burned by the flames. Now, if a plane were to crash into the ocean, an explosion would be the least likeliest thing to worry about. Depending on the condition, and how the landing took place, a plane may or may not break apart. Although most cases would end up in the plane being torn apart upon hitting the water at a high speed, there have been past recorded cases where planes actually landed safely on water. Like famous pilot Sully Sullenberger, who is known to have pulled off a miracle landing on the Hudson River, saving all 155 people on board. But that being said, the struggle doesn't end upon landing. Before a plane actually dives into the ocean, passengers would need to have their life jackets readily strapped on. And upon the collision, one would need to quickly find a way to exit the plane before it sinks, and not while it's sinking. As according to experts, it's much harder to exit a plane while it's sinking or after it sinks. But generally, if the plane is intact, it should be able to float for a period of time, allowing passengers to escape. Majority of flight crews are trained for this situation. And if they manage to reach the life rafts and get it inflated, you ought to swim to them, or try to get their attention. This will be crucial, as everyone is panicking. One would need to stay calm to be able to deal with the situation. As long as you can comfortably stay afloat, all you need to do is to wait for rescue. But even so, many would suffer severe injuries during the crash, and those who have fallen unconscious may have to suffer the fate of drowning. Now, let us listen to a story from past victim, Fraser G., where he shared his experience being on a hijacked plane, flying from London to Nairobi in December 2000.
I remember we were flying out to Kenya. I was 9 at that time. Me, my dad, and my brother. It was halfway through the flight, about 5 a.m. Most of the people were sleeping, and I was the few that were awake. I remember seeing a guy walk past me. I managed to look him straight in the eyes before he walked right into the cockpit. Paul Mukanyi, who was the hijacker, literally grabbed hold of co-pilot Phil Watson, pulling him all the way back, while Phil pulled the controls back. The plane quickly tilted vertically 90 degrees, and we all flew back in our chairs, leaning back. I remembered it very clearly, as it was steeper than takeoff. It was hella scary. And at that point, Hagen, who was the captain, got out of his bunk. I believe the plane was on autopilot at that time. Hagen jumped out of his bunk and quickly stuck his fingers into Mukanyi's eye, trying to get him to release the grip off of the co-pilot. The plane basically ascended 4,000 feet, causing us to reach an altitude of about 41,000 feet, before losing all its speed and flipping upside down. It was shaking really violently throughout, and I remembered seeing everyone's stuff flying everywhere. A stewardess apparently had even broken her ankle from one of the trolleys in the galley that rolled right into her. And there were a few people who also hit their heads on the ceiling when the plane dropped. And in about 20 seconds, the plane had dropped 12,000 feet, which was about 400 miles per hour straight down in a jumbo jet. From what I heard, the wings were just 4 to 5 seconds away from ripping off. All the engines had stalled, leaving Phil, the co-pilot, fighting to pull us out of that dive. And the fact that he was able to then pull it off with no engines at all while being attacked, it has led on to people actually calling it the miracle maneuver. I remember at that point, Captain Hagen was still caught in a struggle with the hijacker. And as he shouts for help, I think it was Brian Ferry's wife who stood out saying go help him. A few passengers then rushed towards him and helped pull Paul Mukanyi down. What I would never forget was definitely seeing everyone screaming and crying. There were even grown men who were crying, thinking this was it, we could all die here. And the saddest part was when I saw the pilot's wife struggling to get to her kids, while the plane was diving down at 400 miles per hour. I could never remove what I had seen. When we landed in Kenya much later, it was like a film. I remember seeing SWAT teams storming in and dragging Paul Mukanyi out of the plane. As they dragged him past me, I saw his eyes were all mangled up, and he was in a really bad shape. And from what I heard from other passengers, Paul was mumbling about wanting to fly the plane, but nobody knew as to why he tried to crash it. And it boggles me even till today, as his intentions were never really investigated. As of today, he's a free man. I mean, I don't hate him, nor do I want to seek revenge, but I would really love to have a conversation with him, and to understand what was really on his mind at that time. When I was 19, I even remember meeting 3 British Airways pilots in a pub, and asking them about the incident. And they confirmed what my dad had told me when I was younger. As my dad worked for a subsidiary of British Airways, he once told me that our flight was in the training course of every British Airways pilot. Pilots would be put in a simulator of our flight, to try and do what Phil Watson did, which was to pull us out of that dive, and nobody succeeded. The 3 pilots then told me I was very lucky to be still alive, and that I should have been dead. I've been incredibly grateful to Captain Hagen and co-pilot Phil Watson for saving all of us. It had somehow made me strive to do better in my life, trying to make the most out of it. But having said that, it is definitely the scariest experience of my life.
So, have you ever been through a flight incident? What was your experience like? Let us know in the comments. Although a plane crash may sound frightening and spine-chilling to most, the fact is, it's still pretty safe to fly. After numerous crash incidents, more and more precautions have been taken into securing the safety of a flight. Therefore, just sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. So stay safe, my friends. And if you like the content, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe, as it'll greatly help us in growing our channel, allowing us to provide you with more constructive content in the future. See you next time.